Calling Eve a helper sounds harmless until you discover that Genesis uses the same Hebrew noun later used for God when shields, swords, enemies, and rescue fill the scene. If helper makes you picture an assistant standing behind the real worker, you may be reading the first human relationship through a modern job title instead of the Bible. The clue is not only Ezer, the word translated helper. It is the full phrase Ezer Kenegdo, and the second half places the woman not behind the man, but corresponding to him. Then Moses uses that noun in an inflected form in his final blessing, where the Lord appears amid Israel's shield, sword, and defeated enemies. But that does not mean Ezer secretly means warrior, as many viral explanations claim. So what does the word say about Eve? And why does Genesis place it at the first moment in creation that God calls something not good? The New International Version renders the key sentence in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Familiar words can make that line feel settled before the investigation has even begun. The man has a problem, so God gives him someone to assist him. But the Hebrew text makes the scene stranger than that summary suggests. At this point, the narrative has not yet called the man Adam as a personal name in the ordinary way. It repeatedly speaks of Ha-Adam, the human, or the man, and the woman will not receive the name Eve until after the rupture in the next chapter. The title calls her Eve because that is how readers know her, but the story first presents something more foundational. One human stands alone, and God announces that this solitary condition contradicts what the human calling requires. The woman enters the story as God's answer to that lack. Before we decide whether helper sounds important or inferior, we have to ask what kind of lack God is answering. The title's promised connection appears in the final blessing of Deuteronomy chapter 33. Moses pictures God riding across the heavens to Israel's aid. Enemies are driven out, the people are secured, and the blessing closes with a shield, a sword, and defeated opponents. In the New International Version, the Lord is described as Israel's shield and helper and glorious sword. The Hebrew forms behind this help come from the same noun, Ezer, that appears in Genesis. The forms are inflected because Hebrew can attach prepositions and personal endings to a noun, but the lexical connection is real. Scripture uses Ezer for the help God provides when his people face enemies they cannot defeat by themselves. Yet the military force comes from Deuteronomy's scene. Shield, sword, rescue, and cowering enemies surround the noun. They are not smuggled inside its dictionary definition. Ezer still means help, aid, or a helper. Translating it as warrior back in Eden would turn the atmosphere of one passage into the meaning of a word in another. The evidence makes helper weightier than a junior assistant while giving us no license to invent a more dramatic Hebrew gloss. Watch how the blessing builds that force. In verse 26, God rides the heavens to Israel's help. The Hebrew form often rendered to your help is Ezer carrying an attached ending. The next lines place everlasting arms beneath the people and drive the enemy out before them. By verse 29, the noun appears again in the expression many versions render the shield of your help, while the New International Version communicates the thought as shield and helper. Then comes the sword and the picture of enemies brought low. The word did not generate that battlefield by itself. Moses built the scene around it. That is the central distinction the rest of the investigation must preserve. The same Hebrew noun is genuinely present in Eden and in this blessing, but each passage tells us what the help looks like there. In Deuteronomy, it looks like divine protection against enemies. Genesis will give it a different human shape. With that connection established, return to the moment God speaks in Eden. His announcement breaks the rhythm of creation. In Genesis chapter 1, light, land, seas, and living creatures are repeatedly called good, and the completed creation is very good. Chapter 2 then gives us the first not good, the human alone. The man is already alive by God's breath, placed in the garden, entrusted with work, and given a command concerning the trees. He is active and responsible, yet something essential is absent. Genesis chapter 1 has briefly shown the completed picture. Humankind bears God's image as male and female, receives his blessing, and shares the commission to fill the earth and rule over the creatures. Chapter 2 slows that picture down so the reader can feel what a solitary human cannot become by himself. At this point, the man has a place, a task, abundance, direct access to God's instruction, and the capacity to act meaningfully. Genesis is not describing a helpless creature who needs someone competent to manage him. It is drawing a line between functioning and fullness. A person may work, understand, decide, and still be unable to produce shared human life from isolation. That distinction raises the real question behind the phrase. What kind of helper can answer a lack that stronger muscles, greater productivity, or another assignment would never solve? The answer must fit more than the garden's workload. It must fit the human himself. This is why the story moves next through living creatures rather than directly into a list of duties for the woman. God could have formed the woman immediately, but the story delays the answer. Animals are brought before the man, and he names them one after another. The sequence is not a confused search by God who has already named the problem and promised the solution. It makes the absence visible to the man and to the reader. Life fills the garden, yet the refrain remains. No Ezer Kenegdo has been found for him. For now, the narrative leaves that verdict hanging. We will return to the animals when the woman appears, because the man's reaction will show more clearly than a dictionary why none of those creatures could answer his solitude. English has added another layer to the problem. Today, a helper often sounds like the junior person in the room. A teacher has a classroom helper. A skilled worker may bring someone who carries tools and follows instructions. Older English produced a different confusion. The King James Version said God would make an helpmeet for him. Help was the noun, while meet was an adjective meaning fitting or suitable. The translators were not creating a fixed role called helpmeet. Over time, however, readers fused the two words. Helpmeet became helpmeet, and then, through the influence of the familiar word mate, helpmate. A phrase about help fitted to the man began to sound like the title of a permanent domestic assistant. Hearing the old wording as two separate parts already changes the image. Help first, then the kind of fit that help requires. The history leaves the King James wording intact and shows how English changed around it. Even the modern phrase, suitable helper, can carry the workplace image into Eden before the Hebrew has had a chance to define the relationship. The first Hebrew word is Ezer, pronounced roughly E-H, Zer. Standard lexicons give its basic sense as help, aid, or a helper. It may describe assistance or the person providing it. The noun alone establishes no chain of command. A helper may stand above, below, or beside the person being helped, depending on who they are and what is happening. This is where readers can fall into opposite errors. Some hear the modern English word and assume subordination. Others notice the passages about God and claim Ezer must mean a mighty rescuer, a warrior, or someone inherently superior. The first conclusion loads too much into English. The second loads the scenery of selected passages into the Hebrew noun. Ezer names aid brought to a real need. The surrounding sentence tells us whether that aid takes the form of counsel, protection, military rescue, ordinary support, or something else. In Genesis, the crisis is not an enemy army. It is the condition God has just declared not good. A human being unable to fulfill the intended human life alone. A word can carry enormous weight without changing its basic definition. If someone says, "The physician was my help," the word help never becomes a synonym for physician, medicine, or surgery. The crisis and the person involved give the aid its particular form. Biblical usage works the same way. When Ezer describes God's help for Israel, his identity and action make the aid divine, faithful, and powerful, while the noun retains its ordinary lexical sense. In Genesis, the word reaches the woman without transferring God's attributes or Deuteronomy's weapons to her. It tells us that she supplies help at the exact point where the man is lacking. This protects the investigation from a false choice. The evidence leaves us with neither a weak assistant nor a secret warrior. The word is ordinary. The need, the helper, and the outcome can make the help indispensable. Two other passages confirm the weight of the word without becoming a catalog. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 4, Moses explains the name Ezer by remembering that his father's God was his help and delivered him from Pharaoh's sword. The form translated my help contains Ezer with an ending. A weapon threatens Moses, and God supplies what Moses cannot supply for himself. The sentence emphasizes his vulnerability, not his superiority over the one helping him. Moses carries the memory of that dependence in his son's name. The rescue is not a passing illustration, but part of the family's testimony. Psalm 33 then widens the camera from one fugitive to a nation tempted to trust visible power. Kings are not saved by large armies, warriors do not escape through strength, and a war horse cannot guarantee deliverance. The song turns toward the Lord as our help and our shield. Once again, the surrounding imagery makes the assistance decisive. Help is still not a secret synonym for sword, shield, or warrior. These two passages show how powerful Ezer can be when survival depends on it, and they expose the weakness of reading Genesis as though the man were the complete, important person, while the woman merely made his work more convenient. The one receiving an Ezer is the one who lacks something he cannot produce alone. Ezekiel chapter 12, verse 14 supplies the necessary counterexample. The prophet describes the people around Jerusalem's ruler, his attendants or helpers, who will be scattered along with his forces. The same noun can refer to the retinue of a human ruler, people who do serve someone above them. That occurrence blocks the claim that Ezer automatically marks the helper as equal or superior. The passages about God block the opposite claim that it marks the helper as inferior. The word carries no rank by itself. Status comes from the people involved in the larger scene. That is why the lexical discovery must remain both strong and limited. The Bible can use Ezer for God's life-saving aid, for a ruler's attendance, and for the woman in Eden without declaring those relationships identical. What the occurrences share is help directed toward a need. Genesis must tell us what kind of person can meet the man's need and what relation she bears to him. That work falls to the second half of the phrase Kenegdo, pronounced roughly Kenegdo. Hebrew packs several elements together. The opening sound means like or according to. The central term carries the spatial idea of being in front of, opposite, or set in relation to something. The ending means him. Together, the expression points to a helper corresponding to him, someone suited to him, a counterpart matched to the human standing alone. Opposite can sound hostile in English, as though God promised the man an adversary. The garden scene points elsewhere. Imagine two people able to stand face to face because they share a common human world, rather than one fading into the background of the other. The woman will be like the man in the way no animal is, yet she remains a genuinely other person. The phrase holds shared humanity and genuine distinction together. Modern roles, personality traits, and spheres of authority all lie beyond what this wording specifies. The promised help must come from one who truly answers the man's solitary condition. Some popular explanations press the spatial image into a permanent mission of opposition. The woman stands against the man in order to correct or resist him. Honest correction may belong to a healthy relationship, but Kenegdo describes fitness and relation rather than a lifelong contest of wills. Other readings turn counterpart into a catalog of stereotypes, assigning one spouse emotion, the other reason, one the home, the other the public world. Those divisions come from outside the phrase. Its immediate contrast is far simpler. Animals can be useful and still fail to be matched to the man. The woman can share his life, recognize and answer him, and participate in a human future no solitary individual can generate. The image is face-to-face relation, not permanent hostility. This explains why English translations vary without requiring a conspiracy. The New International Version keeps helper and describes her as suitable for him. The New English translation chooses companion and states that she corresponds to him. The King James Version used the older construction helpmeet for him, meaning help fitted to him. Each choice preserves something and risks softening something else. Helper keeps the direct sense of Ezer, but may sound junior today. Companion makes the relationship clear, but can blur the fact that real aid is needed. Suitable is natural English, though less vivid than counterpart. Translation, therefore, creates a trade-off rather than a scandal. One version emphasizes assistance, another relationship, another fitness. No single familiar phrase carries every shade, and none should be isolated from the scene that follows. The safest reading keeps both Hebrew words together, then watches the story display what kind of match God provides. Now the animals return as more than a curious interruption. Verse 20 repeats the full phrase and says no Ezer Kenegdo was found for the man. Many creatures could assist him in some way. They might carry weight, offer protection, or simply fill the garden with life. Usefulness, however, fails the test. Naming them allows the man to recognize each creature for what it is, but recognition keeps revealing the same boundary. Life is abundant, yet shared humanity is absent. None can join the vocation and union toward which the story is moving. The delay makes the arrival of the woman intelligible before anyone explains her role. Instead of presenting her as one more creature in the line, God brings her after the line has failed. The man's first words about her contain no job description. Rather than praising her efficiency or listing the chores she can perform, he responds with the first human poetry in the Bible. She is bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh. His words solve the mystery left by the animals. Here, at last, is one of his own kind, not as a possession but as one who shares his human nature. The wording translated "this is now" carries the force of recognition after absence. This time, at last. The repetition of bone and flesh slows the exclamation down, as though the man is naming the kinship he has finally encountered. The search ends because he can look at another person and recognize a shared human life looking back. This is what the promised counterpart had to be. Neither merely useful nor simply present, but able to stand face to face with him. The order of events keeps the scene from becoming a simple story about a lonely man placing an order for a wife. He never complains, drafts a list of qualities, or asks God to solve a feeling. God identifies the condition first. The verdict, not good, belongs to the Creator's understanding of what human life is for, and the answer comes from his initiative. This also prevents the verse from becoming a guarantee that marriage will erase every experience of loneliness. Genesis is describing the solitary state of humanity inside the creation story and the shared future that one man cannot generate alone. The animals make that structural absence visible. The woman makes the answer visible. She arrives neither as a prize the man negotiated, nor as an employee he recruited, but as the provision God judged necessary for the human world he intended. The next lines deepen that recognition. The traditional translation says God takes a rib from the man. The Hebrew word tsela can also mean a side, and interpreters continue to debate the exact physical picture. Elsewhere, the word often refers to the side of a structure or object, while its use for something taken from the man's body has supported the traditional rendering rib. The vocabulary and context allow the anatomical verdict to remain open, while the narrative's central point survives either rendering. Unlike the animals formed from the ground in the scene, the woman is built from what God takes from the man himself. Even the verb changes the texture of the action. God builds the taken part into a woman and brings her to him. The story lingers over divine intention rather than treating her appearance as an afterthought. The man interprets her origin through bone and flesh, language of shared substance and kinship. He calls her ishah in relation to ish, creating a deliberate sound play between woman and man. The echo allows the narration to make their relation audible, but it is not a complete demonstration of how the two Hebrew words developed historically. Sound play serves recognition, not a lesson in etymology. Every part of the moment points in the same direction. The woman is neither another animal assigned to human service nor an unrelated worker placed in the same garden. She is a genuinely other person who nevertheless shares the man's humanity. The help God promised comes through kinship strong enough for the man to hear similarity in their very designations. The narrator then explains where this relationship leads. A man leaves his father and mother, is united to his wife, and the two become one flesh. The movement from "at last" to "therefore" matters. The man's recognition is not an isolated burst of emotion. It becomes the narrative explanation for a new human bond. His closest loyalties are reordered around his wife, and two lives become a new family. The chapter closes with both people naked and without shame, equally exposed and without fear before one another. Vulnerability here is safe because the relationship has not yet been fractured by shame, accusation, or concealment. Genesis directly calls the woman an Ezer for the man. This sentence reserves the noun for her, and precision should preserve that direction. Yet the wording offers the man no reason to boast. He is the one whose solitude God calls not good. He is the one for whom no fitting counterpart can be found among the animals. The designation identifies a lack in him before it describes a contribution from her. By the end of the chapter, the solution has become two humans joined in a bond the solitary man could never create for himself, far removed from a supervisor standing over an employee. The story begins this movement with need and ends it with union. Genesis chapter 1 now supplies the wider frame without replacing the details of chapter 2. The two chapters move at different speeds. The first presents the completed human calling in a few lines. The second enters the garden and lets the reader experience how the human pair comes to be. God creates humankind in his image, explicitly as male and female. He blesses them and addresses the commission to fill the earth and rule over the creatures to them. The grammar of that blessing is shared before chapter 2 focuses on the man's initial solitude. Chapter 2 gives that shared calling narrative texture. The man receives the garden task before the woman appears, but the completed picture of humanity includes both. Fruitfulness obviously cannot happen through the man alone, yet the woman's significance extends beyond childbirth. Divine image, blessing, responsibility for the created world, human community, and one flesh union all belong to the frame. If Genesis wanted only another laborer, the long failure to find a match among the animals would be a strange root. If it wanted only reproduction, the language of bone, flesh, leaving, uniting, and absence of shame would say far more than necessary. The woman answers solitude at the level of shared humanity and calling. She is the one with whom the man can enter the kind of human life the opening chapter had already presented in completed form. The passage still needs boundaries. Genesis chapter 2 directs this origin story toward the marital union of this woman and man rather than turning every woman into the personal assistant of every man. Unmarried people remain fully human and fully made in God's image because the dignity of humankind is grounded in God's creative act rather than marital status. Ezer Kenegdo also leaves later Christian debates about leadership, marriage, and the church unresolved by itself. Those questions must be examined in the passages that address them. Even within Genesis, the statement that the husband will rule over the woman appears in chapter 3 after rebellion has ruptured the garden. Christians debate its wider implications, but that location matters. Rule enters the story after the rupture. It is absent from the lexical definition of Ezer or Kenegdo. The firm conclusion here is narrower. The noun encodes no hierarchy, while the full scene presents the woman as the fitting human counterpart God provides for a man who cannot fulfill the intended human life alone. Now, battle and garden can be seen together without confusing them. Moses cannot rescue himself from Pharaoh's sword. Israel cannot secure its future through armies and horses. In those crises, Ezer names help that arrives where human resources fail. The need is mortal and the response is divine. So the surrounding language flashes with rescue, shield, and defeated enemies. Eden contains no battlefield, but it reveals another limit just as real within its own story. The solitary man cannot create human fellowship, shared fruitfulness, or a partner matched to him from within himself. Naming every animal can reveal the absence, but it cannot fill it. Work can occupy him, but work cannot stand face to face with him. God provides the woman, and the human future changes. That is the link promised by the title. The same Hebrew noun can describe the help God gives amid enemies and the help the woman brings in the garden, because Ezer speaks of aid meeting a genuine lack. The parallel is lexical. The scenes remain distinct. The battlefield supplies military force, while the garden supplies kinship, union, and shared vocation. Eve is not secretly called a warrior, a sword, or a divine figure. She is the human answer to the one condition God has declared not good. The comparison exposes the man's dependence and restores weight to a word modern English often makes sound small. That weight changes how the verse is heard. A man cannot point to helper and imagine, "The important life is mine. She exists around it." In the sentence, he is the person who is not enough alone. The word that seemed to place the woman beneath him first reveals something missing within his solitary condition. Receiving help proves dependence rather than superiority. In the battle passages, the recipients need Ezer precisely because their own strength cannot secure the outcome. Genesis uses the same ordinary noun to make dependence part of the human beginning. A woman, meanwhile, needs no fabricated claim that Ezer literally means warrior queen in order for the text to honor her. The honor is already built into the movement from not good to at last. She shares the man's humanity, bears God's image, participates in the human commission, and becomes the one person with whom a one-flesh life is possible. Help here is neither decorative nor demeaning. It is necessary, personal, and fitted to the need the story has exposed. The passage, therefore, challenges the modern fantasy that strength means needing no one. Dependence appears before sin. Inside the world God is still forming. Genesis answers human solitude with another image-bearing human who can meet the first face-to-face. So, helper was never the small word our modern job titles can make it sound like. Ezer names needed aid. Kenegdo identifies the fitting counterpart, and the story shows a woman who shares the man's humanity and makes the intended human future possible. The shield and sword taught us how decisive help can be. The garden taught us what this help looks like for the first human pair. Before this investigation, what picture did the word helper create in your mind? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe for more investigations into the original language, history, and context behind Scripture's most familiar passages.